it's definitely like, this is the first you do you, right?
Yes.
My response to the waterfall is completely equal with yours, and you do you and I'll do me and we're good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. You're explaining that much better than me.
It's because she's in California.
Is that what it is? Oh, yeah.
I live in the land of you do you. Welcome to Scalay Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. Scalay Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm your host, Brandy Venzel. You can find me over at afterthoughtsblog.net, spreading my Charlotte Mason joy through blog posts, study guides, audios, and more. My co-hosts today are Pam Barnhill, Mystie Winkler, and Abby Wall. Pam is a speaker, podcaster, blogger at pambarnhill.com, and author of 2 fabulous books, Better Together and Plan Your Year. Mystie is a second-generation homeschooler with 5 kids and too many projects. With her blog, podcast, and membership, she helps you organize your attitude so you can organize your life. Find her over at simplyconvivial.com. Abby is basically the queen of the Scalay Sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer, rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. Okay, so listen up because I have a big announcement today. We are, yes, doing reading journals again this year. I mean the real physical copies that we sold out of so quickly last year. They're going to be the same great layout you have come to love, which helps you make a reading plan, track your progress, and also improve in your ability to process what you read and even review a book. The cover will be updated so that you can tell last year's copy from this year's copy on your shelf. If you are on our email list or inside the Sistership, you will be notified once these are actually available for sale, so keep your eyes peeled for the official announcement. Today's episode is the first of 2 that we are doing that cover ideas from C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man. More specifically from his first essay in that book entitled Men Without Chess. This book has a lot of terminology that gets thrown around in classical circles, and we're going to tackle those definitions together. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our Scalay Everyday. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
All right.
This is Mystie, and my pick today is Early Christian Writings. It's a Penguin Classics book from the early church fathers, epistles mostly, because that's what they wrote. They wrote letters to one another, letters to the churches. Someone mentioned this, I think last year's one of the 5x5 meetups.
Oh.
As the book they did. And so I put it on my list of books to be interested in that I heard about. Then this year I have a letters category. And most of the letters books are really big books. So I read the letters of Francis Schaeffer. And the one that I get to start after I finish this one is the Flannery O'Connor book of letters, which The Habit of Being, which I'm really excited about. If you read her letters, supposedly you'll understand her fiction better. So one can hope. This book has the benefit of being really short. So I have a small, thin little book in my book of letters, books of letters category. And also each chapter or, each letter is very short. So it's also easy to just pick up and read a small bit. But it reads like, I'd say like Augustine, but more like the On Christian Teaching. So I don't know if it's just the translator or what, but they're just really short thoughts that are still very deep. So it's like you don't have to read a whole lot of pages before the thought is finished. So I'm reading, right now I'm in the first epistle of Clement to the Corinthians. One little bit is Since then we are the Holy One's own special portion, let us omit no possible means of sanctification. God, it says, opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So let us attach ourselves firmly to men who have received this grace. Let us clothe ourselves in a mutual tolerance of one another's views, cultivating humility and self-restraint, avoiding all gossiping and backbiting, and earning our justification by deeds and not words. So, it's like sermons, really. It's like they take texts or different pieces and they're expositing, they're teaching, they're applying.
So it's letters, or these are more like sermons that are written down? Wait, your letters are the other books.
No, this is the letters. These are letters too. Yeah, okay. The first epistle of Clement to the Corinthians. So it's not like they're delivered from pulpits. They're letters written to the church, though.
Oh, like how the epistles in the New Testament are.
Right.
Okay, right. I get it. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I don't think I knew a collection like that existed, which, considering where you learned about it, it seems like maybe I should have known since last year. Anyway.
Yeah, later there's a letter. It's almost like a letter written to the churches telling about the martyrdom of Polycarp.
Really?
Oh, yeah. This letter, we are sending you an account of the martyrs, and in particular of Polycarp.
Wow.
So, yeah, some cool letters.
I'll have to put that on my list of things to be interested in. Apparently, it's true you have to hear about things multiple times before you notice them.
What, Abby says 7, right?
Yeah, or more, I think. Yeah. I mean, my kids need more.
I think that's called nagging. Yeah.
You would think. But if they would just listen. No. Well, this is Abby, and I'll go next. And
Okay.
I was on an amazing anniversary trip this week. And so my husband and I were able to get away for a few days, and we had the honor and privilege of hiking 8.5 miles to our destination.
Take weird anniversary trips.
Yeah. Well, we considered the other two options were flying in or horseback riding in. But we were assured by cousins that hiking in was great. So we did that, and it was fine. I read too many books, of course, which was a mistake on the way out. We actually were ready to fly out, but then Oregon decided to be Oregon. And we went from sunny and 70, and the day we wanted to fly out, snow, hail, and rain. So we could not fly out. So
you're like, let's hike in this?
Yeah. So we got to, we're not talking to the cousins anymore. No. No. So we hiked out, and then it was raining. And of course, I took all my rain gear out of my pack because I wanted to carry more books. So gear was in the car.
Oh, wow.
And we started hiking, and it just was drizzling, and which was fine. It was nice and cool and everything like that. But then about mile 6, it started sleeting and then hail and then just full on snowing on us. So it was good times. It was good times. And on my Fitbit, it said that we walked 241 flights of stairs. So we went from 3,600 feet to over 6,000 feet. So super, super good. But anyway, my book that I read, because I did get a lot of reading done at this place, and we were fed wonderfully. It was great. It was in the Wallowas. So there was this historic photo book of pre-World War II things. And so there was a really neat story. And that's where Chief Joseph was in the Nez Perce and everything like that. So there was a great letter that they had. And here's the quote that he had written and that this book had put in there. I am speaking now politically to the people of Enterprise, to the people of Joseph, and to the people of Losteen, and to the people of Wallowa and all those in near these towns. It is necessary that your laborers, the citizens of your country, should live so that they may be able to vote faithfully, to the end that honesty and intelligence shall rule America instead of fraud and ignorance. If the Republic shows great differences between its upper and lower classes, then our country is not truly prosperous. The rich and educated should consider that they have received with their wealth and education a trust which it is their sole duty to fulfill. Their education and wealth are nothing if they are not the power of doing good. And so this was Ralph E. Armstrong, and he was a Nez Perce leader. And he wrote that October 10th, 1929. And they made this note that it was 19 days before the stock market crashed in 1929.
Wow.
So anyway, I read some of the local history there, and then I read some Wendell-Berry essays, and then very ironically, which my husband gave me no end of, or had no end of delight, a book on productivity during vacation. So it's called The One Thing, which I highly recommend. I really like it, actually. So it was good. And then, of course, some books on memory and things like that for preparation. Hiking and reading and relaxing, it was just delightful.
If you say so.
It's scholé.
That's right. Hiking is scholé, according to Don Garrett. So yes.
All right. Can I go, Pam?
Sure. Go right ahead.
This is Brandy. And mine is Natural Born Heroes by Christopher McDougall. And this is another teenagers read aloud thing that we're doing. And it's so good. This is a total whim purchase. So at the end of my summer Charlotte Mason boot camp, I kind of went and scrolled back through some of the different books that other people in the class had recommended. We always keep track of different books that come up, you know, from me and from Haley and that kind of thing. But other people start to say, oh, it reminds me of this book or whatever. And so I went through, and there was one of the dads in the class recommended this book when we got into a conversation about raising children who have grit. I ordered it, and oh my goodness, I just really super love this book. I don't know what I thought it was going to be. Like, at some points, it sounds like a fitness book.
Oh,
but it's not. Like, it's really, I mean, it is, because he's talking about heroics. Of course, there's a very physical component of that, right? Like people that are capable of heroic deeds. But there's so much interesting history that I've never heard of before. So one of the main storylines that he's tracing is, I have to go back and reread it because I'm not even sure I'm following the story, because I just have been blown away by the whole thing and had no idea this was going on. But it was like Hitler invaded the island of Crete. He sent his men to do this and thought that this would be an easy win, but apparently not. And then I got to this point where somehow these British guys end up on the island of Crete, and they decide to kidnap a German general or something. I mean, I'm only like 5-6 chapters in, so I don't know what's happened to him, but somehow they pull this off, even though they're like a bunch of out of shape, unlikely guys who are completely outnumbered and surrounded by Germans, but somehow they kidnap him. I don't know. The whole thing is like super fascinating. One of the things he keeps saying is that on Crete, the people themselves come from a long tradition of heroics. It goes all the way back to people like Theseus. And this is where, you know, Icarus and Daedalus, you know, flew with their wings. And I mean, there's the long history of all these hero tales that go on. And he's basically like, heroism in Crete is a way of life, not like a decision, not a snap decision you make. I fell in love with this guy because he keeps bringing up Plutarch, and he calls Plutarch the Bible of heroism, which I just love. But I was going to read you a little bit of what he said about Plutarch. So he goes into it. He explains who Plutarch was and about parallel lives and when he wrote it and why and all that stuff. And then he talks about this. He says, Plutarch did such a remarkable job. Parallel lives became the handbook for modern history's heroes. It has been like my conscience, Henry IV of France commented, and has whispered in my ear many good suggestions and maxims for my conduct and the government of my affairs. Abraham Lincoln was a devoted reader, as were Teddy Roosevelt, George Patton, John Quincy Adams. When England was rebuilding after the Great War, the hero's Bible was its guide. Plutarch's lives built the heroic ideal of the Elizabethan age, C.S. Lewis acknowledged. And what Plutarch taught them is this: heroes care. True heroism, as the ancients understood, isn't about strength or boldness or even courage. It's about compassion. And I happened to read that aloud to my kids on a Friday evening. And earlier that Friday, I had taught 2 sessions of Plutarch at a local private school. And one of the things that we got into was this idea of like a main way that you can identify, a good king versus a bad king is to look at what they love. Do they love their people? Do they love their country? Or do they love themselves? And, are they putting forth their own families? And do they love money? Or do they love fame or power? And we talked about all the different things. All this came from just a part in our Plutarch reading where it just felt appropriate. But talked about like how those different loves would play out if you loved power more, or if you loved your own family more than your country, or if you loved, I don't know. Anyway. And so then to come in and say that Plutarch identified the power of ordered loves, shall I say? Anyway, it was so good. And he keeps bringing it up. And I think you guys would love this book. And Abby, I know you would love this book. So highly recommend.
He wrote the other book, Born to Run, which was all about those, I want to say they were like a native tribe, and they would run in the Huaraches, and they're like barefoot running, and they would just run for miles and miles and miles. And, they were just fascinating, and running was just part of their culture. And they tried to get them to like compete in competitions and things like that. And they would, but that wasn't why they did it. They're like, you're just taking away all of the joy. Like it was how they just did their life, as they were just born to run. So he's a good writer. I thought he was like a journalist before he did this. And so it was a long time study, but anyway, but I had not heard of this book. So it's definitely going in my cart today.
It's super good. Thank you for making this a real episode.
Yeah, I know. Very meaningful. I just shouldn't multitask and purchase it right now, but it's going to be bought by Abby Wall.
Pam, we want to go?
So I have been reading an awful lot of books about memory lately.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I know.
But it's been kind of fun too, because I've been going back through, some old favorites, and I actually pulled out one that wasn't on Mystie's list, which was Memorize the Faith by Dr. Kevin Vost. I interviewed him for a podcast a couple of years ago, all about the Memory Palace. So the book had some great supplementary material in there about memory palaces. And actually, I pulled it out and did one of the memory palaces in morning time with my kids, one of his memory palaces that he had done. And so we were playing around with that and having fun with it. But that led me down a rabbit trail to some of his other books as I was looking him up online to see what else he had available. And I found How to Think Like Aquinas. And yeah, that one really interested me. So I ordered it. Now, I have not been able to start reading it because I'm reading all of these books on memory, but I have it in my hand and I'm really looking forward to getting to dig in it a little bit later. One of the things I love, so, it was just kind of an intriguing topic, and it's based on a letter that Thomas Aquinas wrote to Brother John on how to study. So it was written in Latin, of course, and then there's a little translation here, but it's a short little letter, but a number of different tidbits, like above all, flee from aimless conversations, which I think just goes to show that Thomas Aquinas was probably an introvert.
Like he wouldn't join us here right now, is what you're saying.
Do not fail to imitate the lives of saintly and noble men. So just, little things like that. One of the most important, do not cease to make time for prayer. But I'm interested and intrigued by the book because it has some really great chapter titles in it. One of my favorite is From the Cell to the Wine Cellar on Crafting a Study Space You Will Love.
That's hilarious.
Now, having said that, the wine cellar part is a metaphor, which is a little disappointing, but, And then another one that I think is going to be really helpful for me is knowing your mental powers and their limits. So I'm really, really looking forward to this one and just kind of digging in and seeing what it's all about. It looks really interesting.
Hi, Abby here to give you an inside look into the community we call the Sistership. It is the place for homeschooling moms to gather and engage in meaningful and fruitful conversation. If you've ever found yourself listening to the podcast and wanting to join the conversation, discuss the ideas presented, or ask a question, then join us inside Sistership. That is where we go in depth and extend the conversation to include all of you. We are passionate about reclaiming and pursuing our own education, and we know that real education happens best in community. Sistership is the place to find your sisters. We have a feature that allows you to search for people near you. We want homeschooling moms to connect locally, and Sistership is here to help. We are fond of saying that friends don't let friends read alone, and we have an active and engaged online community if people in your local area haven't joined yet. Together, we read widely, think deeply, and apply faithfully the educational philosophy and good and great books. So join today.
So today we are discussing, this is really the first of a couple of discussions we're going to be having, but we are discussing Men Without Chests by C.S. Lewis, which is the first essay in the collection of 3 essays known as The Abolition of Man, or as Pam calls it, Abolition.
Yes.
Because it's her favorite. They're on a first name basis. So no last names. Am I correct in assuming that we settled that our main question here today that we're going to tackle from all angles and hopefully an aimless conversation that Aquinas would disapprove of is, what is a man without a chest?
Yes. We realized we have not ever done an episode on the abolition of man, which seems like a mistake. So we're rectifying the mistake because this is one of the books that's often on the list of education books to read. It has some phrases that are tossed around a lot, but unless you read it, they really don't make any sense. So we're going to talk about what are men without chests.
That's true. Well, and this is also part of like the Scholé Sisters personal canon, because we did that Carpe Librum list.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this was on the list.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I was just surprised when I was going through our episodes, looking at what books. Abolition of Man was not on the list of books that we've talked about.
I'm ashamed of us.
You should be.
Pam's been trying to get us to do this for years and we couldn't take a hint. All right.
So what is the problem that C.S. Lewis sees and is addressing in this kind of standalone chapter of abolition?
This was actually a series of speeches that he did in the 40s. I think he did them at Cambridge. He was using an example of a textbook, some of the language that was used in this textbook and why it was important. You know, he said the textbook writers know exactly what they're doing. And what they're trying to do is reduce everything to feelings and take away what something actually is. And so he uses the example of Samuel Coleridge writing about the waterfall and 2 people seeing the waterfall and one of them saying the waterfall is sublime and the other one saying the waterfall is just is nice. So what C.S. Lewis is saying, the textbook will tell you that Coleridge is wrong to say that sublime is a real thing, that sublime is the truth about the waterfall, that instead you can just, it's okay to feel that the waterfall is just nice. And so this is what the textbooks at the time, and I would argue probably today still, are teaching, that it's kind of a relativism, but not really. It's got a different name. Is it subjectivism?
I think so. It's definitely like, this is the first you do you, right?
Yes.
My response to the waterfall is completely equal with yours, and you do you and I'll do me and we're good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. You're explaining that much better than me.
It's because she's in California.
Is that what it is? Oh, yeah.
I live in the land of you do you.
That's exactly right. But also this idea of it being tied up in feelings, you know, how I feel about something defines that thing. The thing is whatever it is, no matter how I feel about it, one way or the other. The thing is still what it is, apart from my feelings. The waterfall is sublime, whether I'm interested in it or not, right?
Right.
And so the textbooks that Lewis was talking about in here were teaching the children that the feelings part is what was important. It was equally okay to say that the waterfall was nice as it was to say it was sublime.
Once we believe that it's completely subjective and you can do you and I can do me and whatever, then we're losing any form of correction. I loved what you said when you said, the waterfall is sublime regardless of my response to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I may or may not see it. I may or may not respond appropriately to it, but it is what it is. When we lose that idea that something itself has merit or virtue, or there's something good in that thing, and it's all like, well, it didn't really do it for me, then I'm losing the sense that maybe I'm lacking in something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think about certain things that I didn't love. And I often give the example of math just because it's very common to dislike math. I never actually disliked math, but I still think it's an easy example to work with because it's so common. God made math and he loves math. So then if I don't like it, I don't love it, I don't like that there's something lacking in me, that's a really powerful thought. And it can apply across the board. I don't like going outside. Well, God made outside. He loves and says it's good. So that's a problem with me, right? Once we reduce it all to, I am what I am, I'm doing me, and my response is always appropriate because I define my surroundings, then really, I think there's no place to even grow and mature because now there's nothing ever wrong with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's part of the problem here with the waterfall example is that it's like what the textbook is saying is that the only true things that you can say about the waterfall are things like its height and its water. It reduces the reality to fact. And then anything else is your subjective feelings, which, as Lewis points out, sublime is not Coleridge's feelings. We call something else sublime when we feel reverence and awe. So saying that sublime describes his feelings is factually inaccurate.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It really is an attack on those feelings of reverence and awe, because those are the feelings that kind of put us in our place, which is not the makers of reality.
Yeah, they are trying to cheapen awe and wonder into sentimentalism or something like that's what I got.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Also an assault on grammar. I mean, I'm not that great at grammar, but I can figure out looking at the sentence that I have sublime feelings and that waterfall is sublime are not the same thing. Like,
mm-hmm.
I'm just not sure in what universe anyone would think. I'm very disappointed that a textbook writer would make such a basic grammatical error. If you're going to manipulate people, you should do it right.
Well, his second example from the same textbook goes along with that as well, because he's saying, this is an English textbook and they don't get their English right,
Right. True.
Yeah.
The second example is where they kind of tear apart the metaphor of a marketing statement as if, anyone was pretending that was good writing to begin with, and saying the lesson ends up being metaphors are dumb. And the problem is they took a dumb example, but then didn't say anything about the example. They extrapolated. See, here is an example of metaphor that's trying to manipulate you. Don't be manipulated by metaphor. The application of that isn't limited to advertisement. It ends up making the people immune to literature itself, which actually ought to shape us.
Do you think it also makes them immune to feelings?
I think it makes them immune to understanding that there are right and wrong feelings or appropriate and inappropriate feelings. And I think that's what we see today, where whatever you feel cannot be questioned.
Right. So it's a lesson on marketing, right? One of the reasons why marketing works is because we do have, I don't even think the right word is feeling. Sometimes we call things feelings. They're not really emotions, but it's like this deep longing that we can have, right? All good marketing is trying to promise you that it can fulfill those deepest longings. Part of the lesson is almost like that longing's dumb.
Mm-hmm.
And the people are dumb. Like everybody's just dumb. Instead of acknowledging that, well, we're vulnerable to this kind of language because it's very real to want certain things out of life and want to experience certain things. And
here's how you actually get it, not through a
Right.
cruise, but through
right.
serving or what,
Yeah. Well, and knowing that everybody who goes on that cruise didn't actually think that was going to
right.
like actually people aren't that dumb.
Yeah. It struck me, he's writing at the same time pretty much as Dorothy Sayers. And one of the things that Dorothy Sayers says in her essay is that we need education because of marketing, because of advertisements. We need to have people who think. And so I wonder if it's something at this time period in particular, which is kind of the rise of manipulative marketing, strong rhetoric in advertising rather than just giving you the details and letting you make a decision. It's using rhetoric to sell. It's like, this is the tactic then that these educators see that same problem that Dorothy Sayers was calling out. And this is the way they are choosing to address it. They're trying to make their students immune to advertising by making them skeptics. He says they're fortifying the minds of young people against emotion, or at least that's what they are trying to do. But I think what we've seen 70 years later is it's made them immune to reality.
Because I think story one triumphed, right?
Yeah.
You do you is what won out and not the critical thinking.
Yeah. And they weren't really teaching critical thinking. Maybe they thought they were. And Lewis says maybe they think they are, but that's not what's happening here.
Right.
Well, I was just looking, it says, without the aid of trained emotions, the intellect is powerless against the animal organism. So he's saying trained emotions. I'd sooner play cards against a man who was quite skeptical about ethics, but bred to believe that a gentleman does not cheat, than against an irreproachable moral philosopher who has been brought up among sharpers.
Oh, that's funny. So the one that I found is earlier from the passage of the schoolboy will learn is the belief that all emotions aroused by local association are in themselves contrary to reason and contemptible. So it's just a contempt for, which it does seem like those are the two options, right? We're a very polarized society. So you have the people who think their emotions define reality, no matter how untethered from reality it is. But then the other side, I do get the sense sometimes with some people that the ideal for them is the automaton that doesn't really have feelings, which that too is very different from the idea that he's presenting here in terms of trained emotions.
So even the idea that your emotions can be right or wrong is a thought that I think many people today have never even had.
That's actually one of my favorite things to say to a child that's freaking out. Sometimes my timing has been off, but if I deliver it correctly, they actually start laughing. I'm like, well, your feelings are wrong. Some of them take this better than others. But, of course, I didn't appreciate it when someone turned the tables and did that to me. So.
My favorite is, I don't care how you feel.
Yeah, I might have said that one a few times. And on page 19, he says, no emotion is in itself a judgment. In that sense, all emotions and sentiments are illogical, but they can be reasonable or unreasonable as they conform to reason or fail to conform. The heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should obey it.
That's a good one. So maybe I shouldn't say, maybe I should rather say, your feelings are unreasonable.
Yes. I think that would probably be the better one.
Because technically you should care.
I know.
If for no other reason than to tell them they're unreasonable.
Right. I was like, well, that's why we're dealing with it right now. I care how you feel, but what you feel is wrong.
Yes.
Or unreasonable.
Our soul F is being suspiciously quiet right now.
Yeah, because you guys are heartless.
Are your
and
feelings
I don't
hurt,
agree
Abby?
with you. No. No. I do think there is a quote that I'm trying to find where a place to start is. So, but it's like, while teaching them nothing about letters, have cut out of his soul long before he is old enough to choose the possibility of having certain experiences which thinkers of more authority than they have held to be generous, fruitful, and humane. And I think that that's where you guys are saying things like, I don't care and everything like that. But like, I think generally all of us
We're joking, Abby.
do. Yeah, I know. But just for those people out there who are listening, who are like,
I was actually
they're
thinking
so
that,
mean.
We are mean, but you know.
Yeah. You are mean, but you're not. You are also you generous, right? We are generous, and we want these fruitful and humane thoughts to be in our kids. So like, you know, there are times when, yes, they are being unreasonable and things like that. And how many conversations and hours do you actually spend talking about, no, you are being unreasonable and this is why. And then you explain, right? I mean, I have lots of conversations like this because sometimes the self-will run riot goes and they have to be, I mean, that's part of parenting, right? Is the care and admonition, like we're bringing them up, and that is exhausting work. And it can't be just like this book, this example. You can't be just like, well, you don't want to be duped. And, you know, because C.S. Lewis does talk about how there are feelings that we need to, what is it? The one you quoted, Pam, right? That our heart has to obey the mind.
Yeah, no, I
Is that
can't
what it
find
was?
it. I moved on from it.
Okay.
She's so over that quote.
Well, I'm still, yeah, sorry. I'm still stuck on that one. So Brandy, when you were talking about the heroes,
Yeah.
you know, your book that you've been reading to your kids, like how much of courage can be something that has to be in the face of fear and things like that. Like I think of these big feelings having links to virtues, right? When they are appropriate and when they are good. So
Right.
It's like this textbook is questioning any figurative language. If it's not literally true, it's like a trick that they pull, like, oh, that's not true because it's not literally true. As if something figurative can't be true, but it's actually those figurative expressions and thoughts that connect our hearts and minds that we need. And so this kind of, Lewis calls it debunking, separates the heart and the head so that the two can't interact with one another. And we need the head to inform the heart. And also then the heart propels action and choices. And so they need to be connected. And it does matter how our children feel because their feelings are going to propel their action. And I wonder if sometimes the lack of initiative that we often see these days is due to the heart and the head being totally separated, a lot of debunking and no connection.
Like they don't care about anything.
They don't care about anything. Yeah.
Well, and there's the other quote that I just thought was a great line from C.S. Lewis. He was talking about the advertisement. He's like, a lesson which had laid such literature beside the advertisement and really discriminated the good from the bad would have been a lesson worth teaching. There would have been some blood and sap in it, the trees of knowledge and of life growing together. I really like the way you put that. The head informing the heart and then that moving us towards action. I think spot on.
I liked the line where he says, filling their book with it, they have been unjust to the parent or headmaster who buys it and has got the work of amateur philosophers where he expected the work of professional grammarians.
Yes.
When you talk about the lack of, what did you say? Lack of assertiveness? Is that what you said?
Yeah, or initiative.
Initiative. Yeah.
I was trying to look, that was the word I was looking for. The lack of initiative. I think there may be something too, and I'm now convinced that we all don't have the same page numbers, so I won't bother to say them. But when he starts talking about debunking, which we will need to go back to in a minute and make sure we've defined, but when he starts talking about debunking in this context, he says, the authors may have honestly misunderstood the pressing educational need of the moment. They see the world around them swayed by emotional propaganda. They have learned from tradition that youth is sentimental. They conclude that the best thing they can do is to fortify the minds of young people against emotion. And I'm going to stop there before I read the rest of it, because the first part, the constant barrage of emotional propaganda, is what has happened to a lot of our young people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I even remember that from when I was in school, and I think things have only gotten worse, but like the constant barrage of environmentalism telling you to care about, I mean, they didn't call it the created order, but what we know is the created order, telling you to care about that without ever giving you a reason to actually care about it. And it was like you could just become numb to it all because you never built any relationship with creation. You were just told, save the whales, global warming, whatever. It was just constant. And I think that is like a numbing effect to the emotions. Now, no one was trying to deprogram the emotions. It was almost like they were trying to force the emotions. But it's kind of like fact checking, right? It has the opposite response. Like now that something's fact checked, I'm like, oh, that's probably true. And I think it's the same kind of thing. Like as they try to force emotions down everybody's throat, people became numb to them. But then he goes on and talks about education. And I think the solution for him, it stands true for all time. And it's not just locked in this particular situation he finds himself in, because he says, for every one pupil who needs to be guarded from a weak excess of sensibility, there are 3 who need to be awakened from the slumber of cold vulgarity. Mm. The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. The right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments.
Right. And that's an important point that I think we need to bring out here is we're not saying that what Lewis is saying, and we're not saying like you should replace emotion with reason, right? That's not the point. The point is that it's the wrong emotion, because the whole men without chest comes from that Plato's 3 parts of the human person, the intellect, the appetites, and the sentiment. And they're kind of poo-pooing the sentiment to get people to turn their backs on it. And what we really need is the good things about the sentiment, the stories, the tradition, recognizing that something is sublime to help form the characters of our kids so that they are prepared to meet the world.
I even had a conversation with one of my children the other day where, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without identifying the child. The child said something about, my friend said this and it sort of made me feel dumb or something. But then also I didn't even really care about the question. And I had to tell the child, like, honestly, if I was doing some self-evaluation, I think I'd be far more concerned that I didn't care about the truthful answer to the question than that I didn't know the answer to the question. Because you can more easily fix ignorance than you can not caring.
Apathy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, and the question wasn't like something dumb. It was more like a theological question that had come up. So it was definitely something that we should care about. And we could question, well, maybe the child wasn't old enough for this particular, whatever. But I mean, like the reality was that even the child had identified inside a lack of concern about the question. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I even feel like in our culture, there's that, right? Like, I don't have to care about, I don't care about that. I don't have to care about that. And I'm like that actually, if we think about God as a God who loves and shows intense concern for his creation. So we're told he knows, every hair on your head, and he has numbered the stars, and he knows everybody's name, and he created all these things and calls them good. And we all know that if he forgot about us for even a second, we would all go away, right? So he's sustaining us constantly. If we really believe that that is who God is and what he is like, then our problem is often not just that we don't care rightly, but likely we're settling for less and don't care enough. Because to reflect him would be to care rightly, but I also think probably more intensely than a lot of us do most of the time.
Well, we're uncomfortable by our ignorance and we don't like to be ignorant, but we only care about our ignorance if we care about the topic. So it's instant gratification, maybe a little bit, where if I don't care, then my ignorance doesn't bother me. I don't have to go find out. I don't have to work or pay attention or think. I can just not care. And that's a pretty easy path to choose.
You know, since all roads lead to Charlotte Mason.
It was only a matter of time.
Yeah. Well done holding off this long.
I really bit my tongue for like 25 minutes. I was just thinking about like, maybe this is the power though of her idea of a broad education in the beginning, because there is a truth in that it is very hard to care about something that you don't know anything about. So the ignorance is actually a deterrent to caring.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about the people I care about, they're people that I know. While it's very sad to hear stories about people I don't know who have suffered some sort of trauma, I can't care about it the way I care about people who I can put names and faces to, because that's just very human, right? We're limited in that way. I mean, one reason why God can care about everything is because he intimately knows everything. Those things go together. So then maybe one of the reasons why Charlotte Mason can say that the test of the success of her education at the end of a child's education is how much they care and how many orders of things they care about. But maybe the reason why she can say that is because she tried to defeat ignorance in a number of areas instead of doing specialization. Anyway, I'm just wondering if it helps the broad nature. I'm wondering if that helps.
So it can become a vicious cycle where you don't care because you don't know.
Yes.
And then because you don't care, you don't put forth effort to know.
Yes. Well, and I even thought about this in this example I gave with my child. It is very obvious that the friend that raised the question is raised in a family that has spent a lot of time talking and thinking about these certain things. And it's very obvious by my child's response that we haven't. I actually place some of that lack of care blame on us as a family or us as parents. That ignorance was probably revealed in lack of care and vice versa. But yeah, they totally go together. So can we back up for a minute though?
By all means.
We brought up debunking, but we didn't really define it. But if we wanted this episode to partly be about words that get thrown around so much, it seems like that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. But everybody in the conversation assumes that everybody else knows what it means. And I don't know that we always know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I don't even know what it means. So,
Mistie's up.
Well, I pulled out the dictionary.
Of course you did.
I wonder what would happen if we hid her dictionary.
There's this book that gives you the definitions of words. I tell my children about it all the time, and they heave heavy sighs at me.
Yes, mine do the same.
But debunking means to expose the falseness or the hollowness of a myth, idea, or belief, or to reduce the inflated reputation of someone, especially by ridicule. So it's ridiculing or mocking, laughing at a myth or idea, a belief. I think it's not being literally true. I think that's kind of where C.S. Lewis is going here with these examples of mocking poetry because it's poetry instead of a fact report, and how that is opposite of what will actually accomplish, perhaps even the goal they're trying to accomplish, making people immune to the lure of advertising.
So debunking is almost like undermining a belief in something?
Yeah.
So here's my question, because this, and I'm saying this because I've run into this before and I didn't have a great response, so I'm hoping somebody else will. And maybe I was trying to debunk something. I don't know. But it was like somehow this person I was talking to, and by the way, this was done like super friendly way. It was not some sort of animosity sort of situation. But so I was like trying to present an article to refute, an argument to refute a different argument. And in the context of that, it was sort of this taunting, like, well, C.S. Lewis told us not to debunk things. But it became like, so therefore I didn't have the right to have a response to something. Like the word debunking was used by someone to try to silence me. And I was trying to think about like, was I really trying to debunk something? And I didn't think I was. I was just disagreeing. I was just being disagreeable. But I was like, I do wonder here, like, if we're going to talk about debunking, I feel like we could run away in one direction, and then it's almost like you're still not allowed to deal with real issues, because there are real issues, and things like advertising do have to be dealt with, and all sorts of other things have to be dealt with. So how do we do it in a way that honors what Lewis is saying here, to the extent that what he's teaching us is true? How do we honor that?
I don't get the feeling that Lewis is saying we should not debunk things that deserve to be debunked.
Oh,
Interesting.
I mean, there is right or wrong. I mean, he's definitely saying that, right?
Well, I think part of his examples here, and now I need to find where he refers to debunking, but it's not constructive at all. It's almost like there's no caring about what's true. There's only pointing and saying there's something wrong here. Or, sometimes I think of it as I'm teaching something and one of my kids catches me up on the fact that my sentence was incomplete when I spoke it. They found something that they could point at and say, well, that's wrong because I misspoke. They could find something that they could latch onto as wrong and therefore dismiss the entire thing. So it's a little bit of that dismissal instead of being engaged. And I think instead of seeking truth, it's like as soon as you expose something as false, you can then write it off and move on, rather than say what Plato does in the dialogues. He exposes falseness, but it's always because they're seeking truth. They aren't done as soon as something wrong is found. It doesn't end there.
I got the feeling that they could only tell what was wrong because they can't handle the truth. They don't know the truth. They can't see the truth. Or maybe they know it, but they're doing it in such a way so that they suppress the truth. You know what I mean? So it's not that debunking as an act, debunking in and of itself, the practice of debunking something is wrong. It's that it was wrong in this case because they don't know what the truth is or wanted to suppress it so nobody else would.
Here it is on, well, like page numbers are different, but where he's talking about debunking. In debunking this advertisement, they do it in such a way that does not prevent the student from using the exact same tactic on Johnson and Wordsworth and Lamb and Virgil. They're using this trick or this tactic universally, even where it's not appropriate.
Well, and after the quote Brandy read about not to cut down jungles but to irrigate deserts, and then it goes on to say, the right defense against false sentiments is to, inculcate the sentiments. But by starving the sensibility of our pupils, we only make them easier prey to the propagandist when he comes. For famished nature will be avenged, and a hard is no infallible protection against a soft head.
Yeah, and back to the part you were reading, Mystie says, or if there is indeed any obstacle which will prevent a critic from debunking Johnson and Wordsworth and Lamb and Virgil and Thomas Brown and Mr. de la Mare, as the Green Book debunks the advertisement, Gaius and Titus have given their schoolboy readers no faintest help to its discovery. So it still seems to me that it's more of a, how do I know what's truth and not truth? How do I know what's worthy and not worthy? Not that the act of debunking in and of itself is wrong. It's that we haven't provided a reason not to debunk these things. We're just going to go around debunking everything because there is no truth.
Right. And it's the only thing we know how to do. It's necessary, but not sufficient. And it's being treated as sufficient. I think it's being treated here. Debunking is teaching kids logic. And, we had this problem a little bit with teaching fallacies first. Is you have kids going around pointing out fallacies all over the place, even where it's not appropriate.
Well, and they don't know how to be logical, actually.
They don't exactly. They can't construct a logical argument. All they can do is deconstruct other people's arguments. And that's not actually helpful.
That kind of reminds me of that story that Andy Wilson told about himself getting into writing, where he was always criticizing books and how they ended and stuff. And then somebody, I don't know, it's probably one of his parents, was like, then go write a better one.
Mm-hmm.
It's that same kind of thing. Like kids love, especially in the junior high years, right? We teach them fallacies and then they love to go around telling everybody how wrong they are, when you're right. They can't present right. They can't present truth yet, which is why I loved in Liberty of Logic how Stephen turned it all around and was like, you teach fallacies last. Teach them to be reasonable and to know truth. And then the fallacies can be like your crowning achievement of annoyance.
You can debunk something without caring about what is true, I think.
And maybe that's the most important thing. Even thinking about our own selves, like evaluating our own selves, that it is a dangerous thing to mock something you don't actually care about. Like, even if you suspect, something's rotten there, it's just a dangerous thing to start toying with things we don't understand or maybe don't care enough about to understand.
So how does this get us to men without chests?
In trying to remove truth, objective truth from school books, it's not that you're not teaching character or morals or anything, or ethics or anything like that, but you end up replacing it with a different kind of character or morals, which is a lack of character and morals. And I know that's kind of like a roundabout way to say it, but you end up replacing it with that. And so what we have is men without this center part of what Plato was talking about. We have these men without ethics or morals. We have our reason and we have our appetites, but we don't have the sentiment that kind of helps us understand what to do that's right. I'm not sure that was a good explanation.
The word picture of it all, like, I love the emptiness that it evokes, because that's really what he's getting at, right? Like, they're devoid, they're lacking in certain basic aspects of humanity.
Right. They have reasoning power, they have appetites, but they don't have the ethics to steer them in the right direction.
It reminds me of Elie Wiesel's book, Night. And I haven't read this book in so long. It was in a class that I took in college. And so I remember some of the lessons more because we had to talk about it so much. But, he's dealing with the ethics of the Nazi guard, like the people who weren't really full-blown Nazis. They were Germans that were like drafted or just kind of caught up in trying to not die, But you had people who were completely checking their conscience at the door. And the answer they gave for everything was, I'm just following orders. I'm just following orders. And there is a place for following orders. Like, everybody here in this recording believes in hierarchy and believes that's a real thing. But it was like the idea of hierarchy and following orders was somehow allowed to negate basic human feeling, basic human ethics. And they were just automatons doing whatever Hitler and his evil minions, like, they didn't stand up for anything. Anyway, it's like an interesting phenomenon. But whenever I think of Men Without Chests, I think of that book because it was just so striking, because there was even a sense in which they knew it was wrong. It was just like they didn't care enough to stand up or rock the boat, or, it was just like, and maybe it was just an idolatry of the comfy, cozy life, but it seemed like a lack of conviction coupled with a lack of emotion, or at least powerful enough emotion. So they had like this dim idea that it wasn't quite right, but they really didn't care because they were going to be fine.
Not personal responsibility.
Right.
Well, Lewis says here, no justification of virtue will enable a man to be virtuous. So knowing is not enough, or reason is not enough. Without the aid of trained emotions, the intellect is powerless against the animal organism. So we have to train emotions in order for our mind to be able to choose over against just the survival instinct.
We've had the conversation at our house recently. It's like, you wonder how the Nazis were able to take over Germany And it could be that now we know.
Yep.
And so this idea of, Mitzi's talking about the animal instinct. Our animal instinct these days is to preserve our comfort, not make waves, just go along. What does it matter if we follow the rules?
Keep your cushy middle class life.
Exactly.
Preserve that at all costs.
Preserve that at all costs. Right. And so I think that, what we end up with is the no chest is the lack of conviction.
Yeah. Which, a man without a chest is an amputee. He's missing an essential part of himself.
Yeah. So maybe now would be a good time to read the quote.
Do it.
Let me see where to start. Well,
you're going to read the whole essay aloud.
I'm going to do the whole thing. I'm going to do the whole thing.
Do it. Yeah. Just read the whole thing.
I didn't realize we were making audiobooks today.
Yeah. Well, the operation of the Green Book and its kind is to produce what may be called men without chest. It is an outrage that they should be commonly spoken of as intellectuals. This gives them the chance to say that he who attacks them attacks intelligence. Follow the science.
I know. I am science.
It is not so. They are not distinguished from other men by any unusual skill in finding truth, nor any virginal ardor to pursue her. Indeed, it would be strange if they were. A preserving devotion to truth, a nice sense of intellectual honor, cannot be long maintained without the aid of a sentiment which Gaius and Titus could debunk as easily as any other. It is not excess of thought, but defect of fertile and generous emotion that marks them out. Their heads are no bigger than the ordinary. It is the atrophy of the chest beneath that makes them seem so. And all the time, such is the tragicomedy of our situation, we continue to clamor for those very qualities we are rendering impossible. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across the statement that what our civilization needs is more drive, or dynamism, or self-sacrifice, or creativity. In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chest and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful.
I feel like I could just read that in almost any conversation that I've been in the last several months, and it would be applicable.
Yeah. Well, I did not read that quote from Natural Born Heroes on purpose. I mean, I'm not that strategic. So it wasn't like I was thinking about this episode and how that book would go with this episode. But it really does make me think about what he said about Plutarch and the secret to heroism, at least not being first strength or boldness or courage or any of those things. But first, it's that they care. And I think reading Lewis, we would say they care rightly. They care deeply and rightly in a way that is in harmony with reason and the objective truth of our world. That cannot be manufactured or forced from the outside or taught at the last minute when the whole world starts to fall apart. So what do we do? I mean, other than end the episode because it's 3:30, what do we do?
So then the question is, how do you prepare your students?
How do you give them chests?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for this to be a lightning round just because of the time. So Pam gets to start and you guys better be ready.
Okay. Well, my books kept talking to each other while I was reading this. And, I'm reading Beauty in the Word and Recollecting and the Spirit of Tradition, and all about the collective memory of society and the fact that we have this collective memory that we're passing down. Where is it? The purpose of tradition is to serve the personal growth and development of man. This idea that we have this ritual and story that we use to pass down what is good, true, beautiful, and right to our children. And that's the kind of stuff we need to be reading as opposed to the Green Book. And so we have to constantly be reading and telling those things to our kids.
I think now we are less likely to be laughing at honor so much as fearful of honor. And so if you see someone taking some kind of stand on conviction, maybe to hold that up rather than be fearful for them, and having your children hold up examples of people taking risks and losing worldly status or money over standing up with conviction. We need those examples, in real ones in history, and even maybe any that you see in small ways in your own little circles, to be held up as models and as wonderful things, even if they lose something over their conviction, that's wonderful.
That's a great idea. That kind of reminds me of how we were advised to pray for missionaries and churches that were undergoing persecution, because it's very tempting to ask God to stop, like protect them, make this all go away. And not that there's not a place for that kind of a prayer also, but there's been more than one time where I've seen what the people are asking is that they will be strong and courageous and not buckle under the pressure. You know, that their first prayer request isn't that everything would go away, but that they respond rightly and bravely, and that they're willing to lose it all.
And that God will grow his kingdom through those actions.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and we're to put on the whole armor of God, right? We're not meant to hide in a bunker. You know, we are to be out there. And I did want to read one last quote, but where the old initiated, the new merely conditions, right? The old dealt with its pupils as grown birds deal with young birds when they teach them to fly. The new deals with more of them as poultry keeper deals with young birds, making them thus and thus for purposes of which birds know nothing. In a word, the old was a kind of propagation, men transmitting manhood to men, and the new is merely propaganda. To echo what everyone was saying, reading really good books and that collective culture, right? Like these traditional forms and things like that, and honoring things like military service and reading stories about heroes, right? These are all things that are inspiring and tell us something about who we want to become, learning what identities we want to associate with.
All right. Choose propagation, not propaganda. That's our role where we can end.
Nice.
I like it.
All right. Well, it has been a delight talking with you guys, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Brandy.
Thank you.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. All of the books and things mentioned in today's episode are linked in our show notes. Just go to scolesisters.com/SS97 to check it out. Remember, the 2022 Scole Sisters Reading Journal will be available soon. Make sure you are inside the Sistership to be the first to learn about it when it's up in the shop. Go to scolesisters.com/sistership to join. In our next episode, Mystie, Abby, and I will be talking in more depth about the term Ordo Amoris, which came up in today's episode, but we didn't spend much time on it. Ordo Amoris, it's possible, is the most important concept in classical education, so you don't want to miss this discussion. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.